howdy everyone. Welcome to Texas Sea Grant's 9th Seaside Chat. Today I want to welcome our guest speaker, Mario Maquez, who is Texas Sea Grant's aquaculture specialist. Thank you so much for coming in today, Mario. We are so excited to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, and before you get started, I'm going to go ahead and send out the polls. So if our attendees wouldn't mind filling those out, that would be really great for us to have. So go ahead and answer this whenever I launch it. All right, here we go. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop the polling. Thank you guys so much for answering that for me. So Mario, feel free to take it away whenever you're ready.
Sure. Let me just share my screen real quick. Okay, can everyone see that? I hope so. So today I wanted to talk about, so first of all, I wanted to make this a very roundtable kind of discussion, I'm going to be stopping throughout the presentation to take any questions if any arise. So please feel free to ask any questions. If I don't see them, I know our moderator will. So let's just do that. So turning the tides, oyster mariculture in Texas. So the thing is that, Texas has always had a huge history of oyster aquaculture. The oyster industry has always been huge in Texas. These photos I actually got online from the turn of the 20th century and I think the late 1800s. And it shows, as you'd see in the far left, it's a huge oyster mound of shucked oysters where it says oysters in every style. Texas is an oyster state. I think this is in Port Aransas, and in the top other one, the one on the right side, it's a huge mound in Houston. And actually, located in Palacios, Texas, it's right smack dab in the middle between Corpus and Houston. It's a little fishing town. The picture in the bottom shows a photo of the fish and oyster industry, and you can actually see the oyster shacks kind of coming out in the piers. So like the postcard says, Texas is and has always been a oyster state. Well, globally, there's been, according to the FAO, there's been an oyster decline. So it's estimated that 85% of the global natural historical oyster reefs have just gone away. And it's also estimated that the Gulf of Mexico is showing between 15 to 80% loss, which is huge. But these are reference to the historical levels. So we know that Texas and the Gulf of Mexico has always had a good history with oysters. The decline, well, It can be due to different things, dredging, decreases in water quality, nutrient runoff pollution, decreased water flow, disease pollution, and one of the ones that's I guess it's well, most of them are anthropogenic issues is over harvesting. So if you look at the top figure on the right side, it shows the oyster habitat along the Gulf of Mexico. And you can see that Texas, right above, right starting around the Texas coastal bend, it's a really good hotspot for oysters. It has a really good, it's really primed for a good habitat like that. South of Texas, after south of the coastal bend, you'll see that there you'll see that there is a decline, but I will talk about that later in the presentation because they do have oysters there. But these oyster distributions are kind of focused in wild harvesting and commercial catch. Um, so if you look at the top, if you look at the bottom figure, you'll see the commercial landings from the 1950s all the way to 2010. I mean, that's 60 years of data. And you can see a trend. The black, the black line, you can see the the Atlantic Ocean, the Atlantic coast. You can just see that steep decline from about 2,500 commercial landings in metric tons down to about, less than 5,000, probably around 2,000. But if you look at the gray line, you can see the Gulf of Mexico. It's actually had pretty steady commercial landings. And that kind of shows you two things. That kind of infers that the Gulf of Mexico has a really good environment and a very nutrient rich, warm water environment for um, oysters. But obviously, since we've projected that there's been a historical loss in the Gulf of Mexico between 15 to 80, I know that's a huge, there's a lot of variation in that. Another thing can indicate that with increased technology, there's been more stress put into the harvesting of oysters in the Gulf of Mexico. But stable oyster populations still exist in the Gulf of Mexico, and the environment is pretty much well suited for it. But there needs to be something that needs to change. So there's a whole different industry that is coming up. So the thing is that in September 2020, no, yeah, 2020, um, House Bill 1300 passed, allowing oyster aquaculture or oyster mariculture in Texas to be legal. So the thing is that what the cool thing is that Texas is the last coastal state to actually allow it, and we're barely getting into it. So it's better late than never, I suppose. So the thing is that it's a very different industry from wild oyster harvesting. Um, I know in Florida and other states they do tonging. Most of it is through dredging. So the boats go out and they just dredge the reefs, whether they're wild reefs. So we don't do that. So it's a totally different technique. It's different from that. It's a different market. The reason it's a different market is because it really focuses on the raw half shell market. It's your people are paying for, and you're selling a product that is kind of people call it a boutique oyster, so it's very well taken care of. Um, it's a premium half shell niche. It's the way I can kind of explain it is this whole oyster aquaculture um, industry. It's very much like the microbrewery industries that are set up that have been popping up, all over the United States, to where people can get you know a six pack of Bud Light, or they can pay a little more for a microbrewed craft IPA. It's just really the person's choice, but they will be getting more of a premium product, just like farmed oysters. And you can see this is a picture of one of the oysters that I grew, and you can just see that it's very clean. Um, it's very well taken care of. It's got a good shape, and it looks beautiful on a on a plate at a restaurant. So the thing is that, yeah, so the tide is turning in Texas. The tide is turning very strongly. So these aquaculture oysters, they are raised about 95% raised for human consumption. A lot of them, a few of them are raised for, for conservation purposes, but the majority of them in the industry, they're raised for human consumption. So they're cultivated by the oyster farmers from day one. Um, they're maintained from babies. You get the seed from the hatchery. They're about the size of your pinky nail finger. Um, and then they're given to the farm. The farmers buy them. They put them in cages, and they really do raise them from babies to harvest size. And harvest size basically goes. It's about 2.5 inch, but it's really a 3 inch market. That's where people want those oysters. So the thing is, the farm. The farm is different. You can see this. I'm going to show you in the next slide, but you can see on the bottom right hand side, though that's one system, and these are grown in cages. So they're raised in farms, and they're raised that you raise them and maintain them constantly, and you are always emphasizing quality. You are taking them out of the water so they can dry, so they can get rid of biofouling. You split the cages so that there's not too much density in them, where they get a good tumble, so you can actually manipulate the shape of it to get a nice deep cup, and you get a high value niche product, and that's the way it's done. Um, so, so yeah, you're going to make cages. So obviously, I'm going back to like, how does this differ from, um, how does this differ from different types of aquaculture? Well, Texas is very focusing on off-bottom farming. Okay, well, what is off-bottom farming? Well, the thing is that some other states they have rack systems, or they just put them on the bottom, but Texas is really focusing on having just straight up off-bottom farming. The oysters will never touch the bottom. Um, they'll typically never touch the bottom unless there's always circumstances like a hurricane where you need to like drop them in the water for their safety and things like that. So the thing is that since they're off bottom and they're protected in these cages, they can they it protects them against predators, burial, and other losses. So it really is minimizing predation. And you can also put these farms in areas that are soft bottom, where other where natural oyster reefs really would not thrive. It's not because the conditions don't allow it, like the environmental conditions, like the salinity, temperature, nutrient availability. It's because it's a soft bottom. There's nothing for the oysters to attach to in the wild. But you can bring in these farms and really really control it and have oysters in an area that has never been there before. Um, Also, with the off bottom, the way I kind of explain it, the Gulf of Mexico and especially Texas is a very wind driven system. So it's a very shallow water system. It's not very deep. Um, and it's very wind driven, and it's got good tidal flow. So there's a lot of mixing in the water. And the way I always explain it is, soup. Okay, like if you look at a bowl of soup, where's all the fat and carbs and stuff like that? Well, it's usually most of the nutrients are kind of floating at the top. Well, that's the same for marine environments, just water in general. So the thing is that at the top of in the epilimnion, at the top of the water column, there's going to be more food, more algae, things like that. So obviously, these oysters, they have more food availability. Therefore, they can just consume. And the way I've always thought about it in the Gulf of Mexico, since there's really not that much, it's relative, but seasonality compared to the Northeast or the Northwest, these oysters are typically in warmer waters all the time, where they're constantly at a buffet, just eating up, and they're getting bigger and faster and fatter, and they're delicious. Um, Another thing about it is that in these in these farms, the farmer can really control the density, the stocking density, where it really will increase survival. So it'll decrease mortality by not have them growing over where they're not suffocating, things like that. And obviously the farmer can take them up, put them down, control fouling. So typically these oysters and these farms, they are pulled out of the water about once a week, depending when in the season. Most of the time it's for 24-hour period, unless it's the summer where it's very hot, then you can do it for about a 12-hour period. And you can control the fouling. So pulling them out of the water allows them to desiccate, to dry out a little bit. It allows biofouling like algae, barnacles, this and that to just die off. But one thing that it actually does in concordance with that is that it actually forces the oyster to actually close. It closes, and it'll actually allow the oyster to kind of work that abductor muscle to just get bigger. It kind of forces them to work out and just get bigger, stronger, tastier, and yeah, that's it. So and the cool thing about it is in these areas, in these farms, we can control the density per acre. In the wild, there's an X amount, of oysters per acre in the density, but in these farms, we can really control it, and you can have comfortably about 600,000 oysters growing per acre. So it's really good to have off bottom, and you can really take advantage of that. The cubic, uh, the cubic area of the farm, um, and stack the oyster sometimes. So in 2017, NOAA put out some predictions on oyster aquaculture, and so NOAA Fisheries put it out, and they said that yeah, in 2017, 36 million pounds of oysters were harvested, accounting for $186 million. So that's a lot of money, and that with the aquaculture species in the United States, in marine aquaculture species, oysters accounted for 46.8% of the money coming from that. So the thing is that there is a big niche. There's a big industry that's happening, and it's actually growing. And Texas is not even part of it yet. So we're ready to put our foot in the door and really just help this out, because we can see this. It's been around for a good while, and we're really ready to join in. So obviously, you can create. It's very economically beneficial, but there's also environmental benefits. I'm pretty sure that some people joining us. I was seeing. Obviously you know this, but you're oyster people too. I was looking at the participants. Oysters are considered an ecosystem service. So the thing is that an ecosystem service is you're kind of killing two birds with one stone. You're producing a great product, and you're also um, you're also creating a environmental benefit. And the thing is that most people know this. It's kind of a cliche thing to say, but did you know that a healthy adult oyster can filter about 50 gallons of water a day? Yeah, so it's true. So I was doing the math, and a farm that's harvesting about 200,000 oysters, right? It can actually filter 50. It can actually filter a Olympic-sized swimming pool is about 6,500 gallons of water. So in one day, in that 200,000 oyster farm, it can actually filter that Olympics. It can actually filter 15 Olympic-sized swimming pools per day. So that is just that's insane when you look at the numbers. And they're doing one really good thing is that, I mean, they're really improving the water quality. So it's benefiting the Gulf, because one of the things that they're doing is they're really mitigating and reducing the nutrient runoff pollution, especially in states and areas that have a lot of agricultural runoff, fertilizers, things like that. A lot of the nutrients, the nitrogen, it runs into the water. Obviously, the phytoplankton, the algae is going to eat it. Well, if you don't keep those things in check, it can cause things like red tide, harmful algal blooms. in the miss in you know off the Mississippi River, you have a huge dead zone where there's no oxygen, it's just depleted. Well, having these oysters in the water, these farms can really help mitigate and improve the water quality, which is really just good for everyone. It can improve fishing grounds. There's actually Milford Sound, the NOAA lab in Milford Sound. They're actually doing some really good research on improved fishing grounds around oyster aquaculture farms, and they're really collecting some really good data. Another thing is that when you improve the water quality, you make the water clearer so light can penetrate down, and it can actually improve seagrass growth to kind of help. I mean, seagrass growth is great. It does a lot of things, but it also can help stabilize. Stabilize the bottom the benthic layer of the water, and depending whether you have diploid seed or triploid seed. Let's say you have diploid. These farms, they can actually help in reseeding when these oysters, if they can spawn and release their sperm and eggs. Well, they're gonna, the sperm and eggs, they'll just wander off in the current, but it can actually help reseed wild oyster race to help for restoration. And one of the really cool things is that there was a study done, and it estimated that 18 acres of Alabama oyster farms provided about $30,000 in ecosystem services. So that's just phenomenal, and it's just by having these oyster farms. I'm gonna go to questions real quick before I move on to the next topic. So I see one question. So the question is, hi Mario. Say you have off bottom can produce about 600,000 oysters per acre. Do you know if how this compares to the number on naturally or restored reefs? The thing is that natural and restored reefs, it hasn't, it varies. It's always site specific. Um, but the thing is that they typically per meter squared, they really do not have the same density as a farm. So the thing is that obviously, we're talking about density, so it's volume per let's say square meter. A natural restored reef will have a good amount, obviously with the density, depending on density, but typically oyster farms or off bottom farms can typically have it's a higher density per square meter. So yeah, it compares that the um, that the farms are denser. Any more questions? Okay, so moving on. So how does it start? Obviously, this starts always in a hatchery. So where do you get your seed? Well, you get it at a hatchery. So the hatchery starts with algae, broodstock, and seed. So first of all, you have to grow the algae. You have to grow the food for them. The hatcheries are obviously they're land based, and the hatchery farmers and the technicians, they focus on high concentrations of algae, high densities. They really try to get the best algae mixture with high lipid content, good water quality, and constant monitoring. Because you're looking at this algae, it's been known to crash. It can crash, so these techs have to be very vigilant. But the thing is that you're getting small seed. You're spawning the sperm and eggs, so you're getting microscopic little little oysters, and you're keeping them till they're maybe like, I don't know, 4 millimeters big, sometimes 6 millimeters. So the thing is that they're different sizes. So obviously their nutrient requirements are going to be different. So that's where these hatcheries really need to focus on having the best algae mixtures for them to survive. So in doing that, once they have that prepared and they're constantly preparing it, um, there's broodstock. So broodstock is the Texas is actually collecting. Texas is only allowing oysters to farm Texas broodstock. That basically is the offspring from the seed, the offspring. So the parents, the broodstock, are Texas wild oysters, just Texas oysters, because we really want to keep those genetic strains differently. different, because there is some variation, and I'll get to that later on. But in the broodstock, so so in the hatchery, the oyster farmers start playing some Barry Manilow and stuff like that. So it allows these oysters to just start having a good time, and suddenly they start to spawn. They do it different ways. The hatchery managers, sometimes it's chemically induced, sometimes it's with temperature variation, and there's several different ways. So in a spawn, you can spawn millions of oysters. But when you look at the broodstock, when these hatchery managers or these hatcheries, when they're collecting them, they're really looking for several things. They're really looking for the best oysters. They're looking for health, health of the oyster, tolerance, which is maybe disease, maybe it's salinity tolerance, maybe it's temperature tolerance, things like that. And they look for growth rates. So they're really so just selecting them, um, to just get the best oysters out there, um, the most successful oysters, the ones that are going to survive, the ones that are not going to die on the farms for you, the ones that can make it from the tide to the table, to where because it is an industry. You will lose money if your oysters just die. So they're really just trying to select the biggest, strongest, tastiest, healthiest ones that are going to make it from seed to table. And so then once they do that, then there's seed. So the thing is that, I'm not going to get into culture, but in the seed, people look at the size, they look at the strain, but one thing that they look at is ploidy. Texas right now, we're trying to adapt triploids, but that takes a while to do. But right now we're doing diploids, and the difference between triploids and diploids is that diploids they're natural in nature. So we have two chromo, it's two pair, it's an two N, the natural, if and and these oysters can spawn. They can spawn and produce offspring, but typically, these farmers or these hatchery managers or in the industry, they can manipulate, um, these oysters to become triploids, to where they are mostly sterile. I bet it's probably about 99% that are sterile. So the thing is that, they're not gonna waste any energy on on gonad production, or on sperm and egg production, because that's very bioenergetically costly. So that's kind of, the best way I can explain it is a triploid oyster is basically like a seedless watermelon, because a seedless watermelon is a triploid watermelon. So it's it's just selectively bred to not produce, um, offspring. And the thing is that, a lot of oyster farmers want this, because the thing is that if the oyster spawns, and it releases, all that stuff, you're going to get a very watery oyster. So, a lot of farmers, they prefer the triploids, because they're just not going to waste any of their energy in creating sperm and eggs, and they're just going to spend all that money, not all that money, all that energy into just getting, bigger, stronger, and fatter and tastier. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. So one of the things when people are talking about sites is, the thing I really try to emphasize is location, 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 location. One, what you will want to do is you will bend to the oyster's will. The oyster will not bend to your will. Yes, you can have a site that you go out and scout that, oh man, like the pelicans are flying, the flamingos are flapping. We don't have flamingos in Texas, but I'm just saying, it's great, and the dolphins are just swimming around for you. But if it's not the right environment and you're like, wow, man, I want to be out here farming, it's so beautiful. Well, if it's not the right environment for oysters, well, the oyster is not going to bend to your will. You have to bend to the oyster's will. Um, so when you choose the location, when you find the location, the the location must be in an area that oysters can grow. So, do your due diligence. go out and scout the areas. Texas has vast, shallow, warm, nutrient-rich waters. A lot of the things you just really have to worry about is, certain salinities. I know South Texas has hypersaline environments that really aren't that uh, great for oysters, but we'll get to that later. Know your minimum maximum depths. It's really important to go out during like a new moon. I'm not saying to go at night, just go in during a new moon or a full moon phase, because that's when you're going to get the most tidal amplitude in your farm. It's going to give you a really good idea of your maximum depths and your minimum depths. And that helps you and secondly, make sure that it's potentially a legal site. So I'll get into that in a little bit about the legalities of it, but know your minimum maximum depths, because that is going to dictate what type of offshore, off bottom farming you're going to do. So sometimes there's going to be leases that are too shallow. Sometimes they're going to be, too deep. So it's going to dictate that. And the thing is that a lot of farmers, they're going to want that Goldilocks lease. It's not too deep. It's not too shallow. It's just right. Well, that doesn't always happen. Things happen to where the location is going to dictate what kind of gear you use. So let's get into gear for a little bit. So these are all three types of gear that Texas is using. The first one is the adjustable longline. Well, that's the photo of that is on the top right photo. So this is where the oysters, they're actually put into small little cages, and they're kind of strung up. The best way I can explain it is kind of like a clothesline, but you can control how deep the lines, you can lift the lines. They're adjustable, but think of it as a clothesline, and the clothes are obviously the cages. Well, these are actually, they're meant for relatively shallow, firm bottoms. Obviously, the firmness doesn't really matter, but you really do want a shallow site. It's usually, no more than 5 feet in depth, and you do want it to go shallower, because it allows the oysters to desiccate daily. So the tide's you have your oysters on a fixed line, and the tide's gonna go down, and well, guess what? Your oysters are gonna be exposed. So it'll really help desiccate, dry out your oysters, which you want to do on a weekly basis. But also you want to be vigilant, because you don't want them to be out of the water too much. The other method is the floating cage, and the floating cage is the middle picture. That's actually one of my one of my farming buddies took this picture. So the floating cage is really interesting. Think of it the bottom is, it's a floating cage. It's on pontoons, so they can be put in any depth, usually in deeper leases. And the thing is that you can see where these cages are stackable. You can really take advantage of that cubic 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 feet per your lease site. So it allows you to grow more oysters per cubic foot. But the thing is that you will have to manually flip the gear weekly. So as you can see, the pontoons are down. So the cages, the oyster bags, we call that the drying position. But about 6 days a week, those oysters, their pontoons up to where they're in the feeding position. Um, they're really great. They're a little bit more expensive, but obviously you can grow more oysters per cubic foot in that. And then there's another thing. It's the floating bag. The floating bag is very similar to the floating cage. It could be done at any depth, usually in deep releases. You'll have to manually float them, just like the floating cages. But the floating bags, they're relatively less expensive. But you really cannot grow as many oysters per cubic foot as a floating cage. So a lot of times you just have to, take into account costs, your ROI and things like that. So, you have your lease out, you're growing oysters. One thing that's very important, I've seen this a lot with oyster farmers in the Gulf of Mexico, and especially in Florida. One thing that they always tell you is stay ahead of the game. growing oysters in the Gulf can go from good to bad very quickly. We have very nutrient-rich waters. Things grow very quickly here. Obviously, we grow oysters a lot faster here than in the northern some of the northern states, just because it's warmer water. They're always active. When an oyster goes below 5 degrees Celsius, it stops actively feeding. Well, in the Gulf of Mexico, the temperature in the water usually does not go below 5 degrees Celsius. So these guys are constantly feeding, constantly growing. But other things like barnacles, algae, and oyster spat, obviously, can grow as well too. So you always want to be ahead of the game. You don't want to allow your oysters to your cages to biofoul. It can destroy your gear. It can clog your cages, which will affect the nutrient availability, the flow of water through your oyster cage. You can see on the in that in the photo, that is a cage that has a lot of fouling on it, and you don't want that. And another thing about that photo is you can tell that the oyster cage, the it's very dense. So the thing is that cage, it wasn't tended to, so it got fouled up, and it also got a lot of oyster growth on it. Because one important thing to do is staying ahead of the game is you want to keep your oyster densities low. You really never want to have more than 1/3 of your cage filled with oysters. Um, because it allows them to tumble, things, to tumble around, obviously have space to grow. They won't You'll minimize problems, and you'll be able to see things in the cage. For example, one of the things that happens, and I've seen it a lot, is predators going into the cages. I've seen baby I've known, like, I've seen it myself. Baby crab goes into the cage. Well, the thing is that he's in the cage, he's munching, he's hanging out. Well, what do you know? Suddenly the crab just gets bigger, and then they're stuck. They're in a little oyster prison, but they need to eat. So what I've actually seen is one blue crab decimate an entire cage of oysters. Um, Typically the smaller oysters, and that can cost a farmer hundreds, if not thousands of dollars, depending on how small your oysters are or how many oysters you have in the cage. So splitting the cages, obviously, looking at them, it can really it can save you a lot of money. Another thing about staying ahead of the game is organization. You want to track your farm. You want to keep a log, because the thing is that oysters grow at different rates. There's a lot of variability in the rate that oysters grow, even if they come from the same parents. So you want to keep likes with likes. You want to keep the smallest with smallest, mediums with mediums, and largest to largest. It just helps keep your farm organized, and you kind of can know which ones you're about to go to harvest, because the larger ones. Okay, well, let's just say, okay, they'll probably be ready for market in a month, versus the smaller ones. So having it logged, knowing what you did last time, and just keeping a log on your boat or on your phone. Now they have software to help you do that. It can really just help you organize and be more efficient on the farm. Um, and also being prepared. There's a lot of really good. A lot of good material out there. IFAS, in collaboration with it was with the sea grants along the Gulf of Mexico, they did a really good job with hurricane preparedness plans, which really helps the farmer, just guide them in what they need to do, just so when a hurricane or a storm comes down, they'll be ready, to really just to act quickly. Because the thing is that um, by doing that, you're not avoiding potential. You're just decreasing the risk of losing your farm or anything like that. So it's just one of those things. You really need to stay ahead of the game. I'll take questions. Okay, so I'll keep going. The other part is knowing the rules of the game. So knowing the rules and regulations. The thing is, it's Texas Administrative Code. You can go online. It's Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 58, and you just read it. Subchapter E, cultivated oyster mariculture. It's very dry. I'm not gonna lie, but it's the administrative code, and the thing is that it will answer about 80% of the questions that farmers or prospective farmers or distributors or people that want to know how this oyster industry is going to happen, how to, how to play the rules and just do it the correct way. Because the thing is that what you do not know can hurt you. Um, it can hurt you, it can hurt your wallet. But the thing is that we are working with raw shellfish, we're working with raw food. So it essentially, it can hurt the customer, and it can shut you down because of that. So I really encourage you to just go through the Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 58 on cultivated oyster mariculture. It will answer most of your questions. And the thing is that there's agencies to help you. Texas Parks and Wildlife is doing a really good job. They're actually spearheading this oyster mariculture program. And obviously, I'm the aquaculture specialist for here for Texas Sea Grant, and I'm here to assist farmers in any questions they have, from permitting to obtaining seed to establishing a farm to selling your stuff. I'm here to hold your hand until you don't need me to hold your hand anymore. So the rules of the game. So a lot of it is going through agencies. Texas is a little different because you have to go through about 5 different agencies. Texas Parks and Wildlife, they're the main ones. They're the ones in control of it. They're managing it. But you have to get certain permits. You have to go through the Texas Commission of Environmental Quality. You have to get a water rights application and permit. You have to go through the General Land Office to get your lease. Army Corps of Engineers to get your nationwide aquaculture, nationwide 48 permit. And sometimes you have to go through the U.S. Coast Guard if your lease is near a highly trafficked area. So it can be kind of confusing. So I actually kind of came up with a schematic on the permitting. So step one, you are going to apply for your permit, your pre-permit application. Then you're going to go through these non-TPWD agency coordinations. Step two, you're going to go through the General Land Office. And I'll show you that because you will lease the farm, the acres from the General Land Office. So they have to go through that. You have to get through the permitting, and that actually I suggested it to be step two because it usually takes a while to get that done. And then step three, in no particular order, you're going to want to get your wastewater water quality authorization, your aquaculture general permit from Texas Commission of Environmental Quality, and your water rights permit. You're going to go through. You're going to get your training certification from Dishes, the health department, and you're going to want to get your aquaculture license from Texas Department of Ag. So you can just do that whenever. Then after that, step four, I always say step four is U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. You're going to apply for a nationwide 48. I always say to be very careful with that because you're going to send all this into U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and they are going to want all your I's dotted and T's crossed. Yeah, they're going to look through it with a fine-tooth comb as you apply for your nationwide 48, and that might take a little bit. And then after you're done with all of that, then you step five, you go back to your Texas Parks and Wildlife office and kind of do your final permit application. Then they just stamp it, you're good to go, you can start farming. So the things that I recommend to start doing is due diligence. The first thing I recommend doing is going through the Texas Department of Health and Human Services. It's you just Google it, go to the Texas Shellfish Harvest Area Viewer, and it's all there. And the thing is, it'll actually tell you what base systems are approved, conditionally approved, and restricted. So that will really help you. I kind of randomly chose an area in Galveston, in East Galveston Bay, and just I just wanted, like, let's just say I'm a farmer there. So okay, so I looked at it. It's conditionally approved. It's that red dot. So first of all, I know that I can farm there. That's the first thing you do. Second thing you do is you go with a general land office. You look at their land and lease viewer, right? So it's all parceled out. It's all parceled out. But it's available. You can Google all this. This is all online. It's all free, and you can just study it, look for good areas, and it'll actually tell you if the submerged land is available, or or if it's leased, or if there's like oil pipes there or whatever. So after you do that, I would suggest do your homework first, and then you kind of set up a consultation, a site selection consultation with Texas Parks and Wildlife. They're actually very good about that, and they'll take the time to help you select it, and they'll tell you, okay, well, be careful because there's seagrass. You can't have seagrass in your farm. You can't have oyster habitat, an oyster reef there. So it's a site coordination meeting, and really what the thing is that they want to see if it's legal, if it's healthy, and the prereqs. So they want to really minimize the impacts on sensitive habitats. So they have certain buffers established. First of all, your farm has to be 200 feet from from a seagrass habitat, because we don't want it to hurt any seagrass. Then it has to be 500 feet from any oyster habitat, and 2,000 feet from any bird rookery, basically where birds hang out, things like that. And your farm needs to be above 2 feet in depth, which is obvious because you don't want an off-bottom farm to be in such shallow water. So those are the things you do. You kind of do your due diligence, and then you set up a site coordination meeting. So they do an oyster habitat assessment, and it's all free. They'll help you do that. So after that, they're going to ask you to do a natural resource survey. So the thing is that we were actually kind of happy because I think last month they dropped the in situ, the actual core samples from 100 to 50. So the thing is that I think from May to November, um, from fall, winter, and spring, you cannot use side scan sonar. So a lot of farmers they prefer to do side scan sonar because you just run the boat and your acres, and it kind of looks at it. It looks at the beam, and it tells you what's at the bottom. Then you send that to Texas Parks and Wildlife. You still have to do a natural resource survey, which is the coring. So you actually have to go to core, but it'll be 16 cores per acre versus 50. But the thing is that this is an example of, if you just want to do it, not do the side scan sonar, and just do the coring. So what you do is you take every 35 feet, in quadrats. You take that, and you take a core, you take a photo of it, and you just write down its latitude, longitude, its GPS location, and see if it's got seagrass or oysters. So you go through that, and you also have to look at the buffer zones, and then you send it to Six Parks and Wildlife, and then you're good. So that's that. Then you go through the seed per acre. So until December 31st, 2027, actually, Texas Parks and Wildlife is permitting people to import Texas broodstock seed from Gulf of Mexico hatcheries, because we're working on it, but we don't actually have any hatcheries put in place right now. So they're actually allowing farmers to collect wild oysters from harvest areas and send them into certified hatcheries along the Gulf of Mexico, and they can spawn your oysters, and then you can ship them back. And that's how we're starting right now. One of the things that's very interesting, because other states don't have this, Texas does, is Texas actually has the northern oyster and the southern oyster. They're both the eastern oysters, which is Chrysostria virginica. But then the thing is that there's almost like a subspecies south of Aransas Pass. It's a southern oyster, and the thing is that in the lower coast, by the lower and the lower Laguna Madre and the upper Laguna Madre, these areas are very salty. They're very hypersaline environments. So they've actually kind of evolved a special kind of oyster to it's actually genetically different. There's different alleles, like genetic diversity there that hasn't been seen in oysters along the rest of the Gulf of Mexico or the East Coast. And it's just a really special thing. So what Texas is doing is that they're really trying to separate the genetics from kind of muddling up. So they're really separating the northern oyster and the southern oyster, and the area where it crosses, where you cannot cross them, is Aransas Pass. So you have to keep them separated. Um, so yeah, that's the seed. How you get the seed, and the other thing is that one thing that Texas does not want are people to have spike leases, where it's like not in my backyard, like the NIMBY. So what they're actually putting in place is they want people that have seed, that have farms to actually work them. So they're requiring oyster farmers to actually harvest 100,000 seed per acre per year, 100,000 seed per acre per year. So if you want to keep the lease, you have to work it. If not, you'll lose it, because we don't want people just to have leases just so that you know just to take them up, because that's valuable real estate. So that's what we're doing. Let me take some questions. I see 4 questions. Okay, it says, what about getting an individual permit from the ACOE instead of the nationwide, you know, permit 48? So the thing is that Texas, it's not allowing people to get the permit from the ACOE. It's actually, you have to go through the Army Corps and get that nationwide 48 permit. They're very strict on it. Yeah, I was talking to the representatives from the Galveston GLO. I mean, I'm sorry, the Army Corps, and they're very adamant on that. Other question: does the GLO support permit applications to U.S. Army Corps through their permitting service center? I don't know, and I don't think they do have plans to do so. But I can, if you want to email me, I can get with you on that. That's a very good question. Uh, okay. So going there, what happens a lot, and I've seen this a lot, is in the oyster industry. A lot of people want to start really big, really quickly, and I've seen it have dire consequences. So basically, don't get in over your head. It's a steep learning curve, and it's a lot of practice, to get these boutique oysters. And I was talking to one of the oyster farmers, good friend of mine, um, in Florida, and he says, um, "You will kill thousands of oysters." And he was also saying, he's like, "You will not consider yourself an oyster farmer until you've killed probably about 100,000 oysters." Because it's such a steep learning curve. It takes a lot. Respect the work. It's not a overnight. It's not a get rich quick scheme. Respect the work. It's slow and steady. And I've actually seen a lot of farmers go too big, too fast, get too invested in it, and then they just figure out that work is not for them. They thought it would be easy or not as hard as it is. And then they just really, I've seen them even to the point where they abandon their sites and just kind of walk away. They told other farmers, if you want my equipment, take it, because I don't want to have anything to do with this. Um, get a farm size that you can realistically maintain. Um, that's one thing I've seen. Remember, you can grow up to about 600,000 oysters comfortably per acre. 100,000 is the minimum with Texas Parks and Wildlife. Um, if you want to get 10 acres, that's at least, you know, a million oysters minimum. Maximum, I don't know, it's a lot more. So you really need to get a farm size that you can realistically maintain, because like I said earlier, you need to stay ahead of the game, because this can get away from you very quickly, very quickly. Um, we recommend slowly grow your farm and your stock sizes to maybe, I would suggest maybe start off with X amount of oysters. Let's say something you can comfortably do, about 200,000, and then it's just slowly next year go for 300,000, go for 400,000, double it, you know. um, yeah. And just to be careful about it, because it can get away from you really quickly. And another thing is that you actually want to contact your suppliers and contact your hatcheries early, especially since Texas does not have any hatcheries presently. Um, we're not at the top of the list for the other Gulf of Mexico hatcheries. Um, so the thing is that you actually have to call these hatcheries early and contact your suppliers, because these things are out of state as of right now, because the Texas mariculture industry is so new. So a lot of times you're having to work with facilities that they don't know you, they've never dealt with you, and you know you're out of state, so you're not really a priority. Uh, you want to secure your seed stock and gear early, so you're kind of not, you're really not going to be scraping at the bottom of the barrel kind of thing. And one thing I really want to do is, and we could talk about this later, the people that are on, the people that want to be farmers, is I'd like to bin bays, instead of having, because you have to get your wild stock to Galveston, you know, you have to send it to the Gulf of Mexico, to the hatcheries in the Gulf of Mexico. I really want to bin farmers, where it's like, okay, if you're farming, if all these people they're farming in, you know, Galveston, okay, there's 5 farmers. Let's get you guys all together and just do a huge order that a hatchery is more willing to accept, and do, you know, it's easier to spawn larger amounts than, you know, smaller amounts, and they're more willing to do it. So that's one thing I need to do. And if farmers are interested in that, please email me and contact me. Um, Another thing is the branding and selling. We know this. The farmer's your friend. There's no competition. These are some of the really good people I've worked with. They're great. And one thing you want to do is you want to stand out from the others. The thing is that they want to hear your story. Get an Instagram, get a Facebook, get a TikTok or whatever that is, and just do it, because people want to tune in. They want to see you on the farm. They want to see you, you know, processing oysters, things like that. People love that, and it really it helps brand you. It helps brand you. It helps you stand out from the others. And oh, okay, well, this Instagram, you know, it's like Texas Crown Oysters or whatever you want to call your company. Okay, just follow them on Instagram, and then while they're eating your oysters, they can just be watching you do the work, and you know, do whatever. So it really helps stand out. It really helps you brand you. Another thing you want to do is collaborate with other farmers. Farmers will help you. A farmer is your friend. The thing is that if you get 50 farmers in a room together and ask them about doing certain thing, and I think other agents will agree, you will get 50 different ways to do something. Some of them you'll like, some of them you won't, and some of them you're amazed because you never thought about it, and it just makes your life so much easier. Um, they are there. They're not your competition, because the industry is so big. We have so much water. Um, I really suggest helping each other and join a network. There's things. Join a network. For example, like one of the things that I was in when I was in with Florida was I was part of Oyster South. Oyster South is it's a nonprofit, and they really do just focus on networking that industry together with advertising, networking. You can kind of talk about information, ideas, and techniques. It's really beneficial. Get on Instagram. There's a lot of people out there, companies, and you could just follow them and start reaching out. Maybe they've been doing it for 10, 20 years. Maybe they know a little thing or two that you don't know, since you're barely starting out. It'll really help you. And social media platforms. That's what I'd say. Um, just do it. And lastly, I will say before 3 is my buddy Bill Walton said, and I just love what he said. You make money selling oysters, not growing them. So just always remember, as soon as your oyster is harvestable size, you want to get it out as soon as possible. So anyway, I hope you guys liked this presentation. I'd like to have others going more into detail, more into techniques, but this is just kind of an overview. And this is my contact information. And thank you for joining the Seaside Chat.
That was awesome. Thank you so much, Mario. Does anyone have any questions? I do have another poll for our viewers to fill out if that's all right. I'm gonna make it live now. Let's see here.
Oh, and if anyone is interested, just coming to our facility in Palacios, you're more than welcome. Email me and we could coordinate this to come see the facility safely, obviously because of COVID. COVID is a very real thing. And, but yes, I'd love for anyone that's interested to come see it, whether you're a prospective farmer or just a consumer that's interested in the whole industry and how it's done.
And I don't know if you can see the chat, Mario, but we have a question from Beth asking when we hope to see Texas grown oysters on the menu. Do you have an idea about that?
Late 2022. Late 2022. We kind of have our fingers crossed for that.
I'm going to keep the poll live for a few more seconds. So if anyone has any more questions, feel free to drop that in the Q&A box. I see someone asked if we could get a copy of the presentation. We will have a recording be posted soon that you can rewatch. But Mario, would it be possible for you to share the presentation?
Sure, I can. I'll send it to Chloe.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the polling. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming to this Seaside Chat. I hope you all enjoyed it. Stay tuned for the next one that'll be coming up in 2 weeks. And once again, Mario, thank you so much for coming. That was a really great presentation.
Thanks for having me. Have a good day, everyone.
Bye, everybody.